Hey there, and welcome back to Seaver's Bloomin' Farm. Today I'm going to be going over the basics of seed starting. So first of all, why do you want to start seeds indoors? There are several reasons why people want to do this, but for the most part, it's mostly just to control things a little bit more. We can control temperature, light, moisture, so many things when we're growing indoors. And as we know, Mother Nature, we cannot control her, that's for sure. So if we want a little bit better handle on the germination, or if we're wanting to subject the seeds to maybe a cold period or something like that, we are able to do that when we are growing indoors. We also might want to get a jump start on the season, so we can start our seeds indoors before our last expected frost so that they're ready to go outside after that last frost of spring. Get them in the ground. They have an advantage on weeds, on certain pests, and all of that. And they might bloom a little sooner or bear fruit a little bit sooner, whatever the case may be. So, those are some reasons why you might want to be starting your seeds indoors. For me personally, when I am growing a cut flower garden and I have a specific bed spacing, I want to make sure that there's no gaps in that bed. And sometimes when I'm direct sowing, I might have some seeds for whatever reason that don't germinate. And so by starting my cut flowers indoors a little bit early and transplanting them outside later on, I can make sure that each little area of space has a seedling that is transplanted into it. It doesn't mean that we don't have loss later on, but it definitely helps cut down on the blank spaces in my flower bed. So that is why I personally like to start seeds indoors. There are also some seeds that they just do better when I start them indoors. Some of them actually do better if I direct sow them outside, like sunflowers. So it all depends on the seed, but it's really fun to grow your seeds indoors anyways. So that might be another reason why you like to start your seeds indoors. You're trying to push back those winter blues. You want to get growing. You know, the first breath of spring air that you feel after a long winter, you're like, oh, I need to start something. I need to get my hands dirty. I need to do something. I'm so restless. And sometimes starting seeds indoors is a way to kind of combat the winter blues. If you have small children, it's kind of fun to start seeds as well because they learn about how seeds germinate, grow, about plants, and all of that. And they get to see it from a little tiny dormant seed to a seedling to a flower or a vegetable or something like that. So that's really fun if you have kids at home and you want to do a fun little project with them. So now that we've kind of went over why you might want to start your seeds indoors, today's video, I'm just going to be showing you my basic seed starting process. But before we get started, I want to go over some of the supplies that you might want to pick up. You don't have to have any of these. You can be creative. You can improvise, certainly. But these things are really easy to find. They can be fairly cheap. So I just wanted to go over them here. So to begin with the supplies that you might need to get started on this seed starting journey. First of all, you're going to want to probably pick up something called a cell propagation tray. So if you notice this, they usually come in a standard size, and the standard size is normally 20 inches by 10 inches. So we call these underneath here, if you're looking online, these are called 10-20 trays for the 10 inches by 20 inches. Again, this is a standard size, so most of the time you're going to find trays that are this size. Now, when you buy these at a hardware store or a big box store or something like that, they typically come together, these two parts. So you're going to have your cell propagation tray, and it nests down into your 10-20 tray. The 10-20 tray, you can buy these separately, you can buy these separately, which is really nice because let's say, I believe this might be a 72 cell tray. I might want one that has 50 cells in it, or I might want one that has 128 cells. But I can still use my bottom tray and nest them down in there. So that's the nice size about having a standard size tray. The reason why you want it to where this tray nests down into this is because when we're watering, we're going to pour water into this bottom tray here, and then we want the plants to drink up water from the bottom holes here. So you want to get a 10-20 tray with no holes, because sometimes you can buy them with holes, and that's more for like if you are in a greenhouse and you're overhead watering and you need more drainage. But if you're going to be growing inside, you want 10-20 trays with no holes. And then you want to make sure that when you're watering, you're going to be pouring the water, you're going to lift up this tray like this and pour water into the bottom. And then all the seed starting mix that's inside this tray, when it's dry, it naturally wants to wick up moisture into it. So water likes to move from areas of high concentration to low concentration through basically capillary action. That's kind of a little bit of a technical term, but essentially water is going to move from this bottom tray up into the cells, into your seed starting mix whenever it's dry. It's kind of like a self-watering system almost. And you don't want to overhead water most of the time, especially when your seedlings are very tiny, because you could just kind of splash them out of the cell tray, or it might be too much force upon them and it could weaken them, or you could destroy them basically. You just want to be really gentle with your new seedlings. So that's a rundown. Get yourself a cell propagation tray and the 10-20 tray that goes underneath it. You can buy some that are called channel trays, which have actual long channels. A lot of people will use those because then they can pluck the seedlings out and then transplant them into cell trays or pots or something like that. So that's also an option as well. But these are going to be the basic things that you can find. I love to support local. So if I have a local hardware store, you can pick some of these up from there, more than likely during the growing season. But sometimes you just need a larger quantity of things. So I really like to use greenhousemegastore.com, growersolution.com, and these specific trays are a lot thicker and more heavy duty. And these are from bootstrapfarmer.com. I really have enjoyed the products from Bootstrap Farmer. They are very, very thick and sturdy, and they do a great job creating their trays. So maybe you don't want to go the cell tray route and you want to reduce your plastic use. You can purchase something called a soil blocker. Now, excuse me, mine is a little dirty, but we have other videos about soil blocking on the channel, and I'll link them. But you can use this to basically compress your seed starting mix into the little blocks, and then get a tray or an old anything that can hold your blocks and also hold moisture. You can even use some of these, and you just squish the blocks out and you make basically little tiny compressed blocks of soil that you sow your seed on top of, and that works great as well. It's a whole different way of growing, and it takes a little bit of a learning curve to make sure that you're keeping the moisture high. Now, as far as the seed starting mix that you want to use inside here, most of the time you're going to go to the store and find what's called a germination mix. The reason why you want the germination mix is because it is the peat moss or coconut coir or whatever it is shredded a little bit more finely. And so it's easier for the seed to not lose moisture, first of all, but also to start growing within it, putting out their tiny little roots and so on. So you can use a regular potting mix. That's fine. I would advise you to steer clear of potting mixes that have fertilizers in them already. Things like bagged Miracle Grow or something like that. Most of the time those have some slow release fertilizers in there, and we don't really want to be introducing that to our seedlings right away. We could possibly burn them. I'm not a super huge fan of that, but it's not to say that you can't use it either. So if that's what you've got lying around, if that's what you have access to, go ahead and try it. It's not a big deal. I have been very pleased with Vermont Compost Company's compost-based mix this year. It's not necessarily for seed starting, but I've been using it for my soil blocks, and it does have a little bit of nutrition within it because it is compost-based, but it's not something that's going to burn my seedlings. And I just really noticed my seedlings have really enjoyed it. So you may be able to find some of the Fort V mix from other retailers that you can order a bag in and ship it to your house. Maybe you have a location near you that supplies that. You can go onto their website and look it up. And that's Vermont Compost Company. Now, once you've sown your seed, you're probably going to need something called a humidity dome. Excuse me again, this is a little dirty, but the humidity dome will go right on top of your seed tray like this. And that just basically locks in the moisture. So when we are starting our seeds, we do not want to add a bunch of water to the bottom of this tray. Your seed starting mix should be moist when you're filling your trays and when you're planting your seeds. After that, you do not need to water until your seedlings have germinated and have started growing and the seed starting mix is starting to possibly dry out a little bit on the top. You do not want to just flood the bottom of this tray with water and then leave this lid on and just wait, because I learned the hard way, you end up having a lot of issues of basically there's no oxygen, so the seeds may not germinate because of the low oxygen environment, or they might sprout and then die because they've had waterlogged conditions, no oxygen, maybe more susceptible to plant pathogens, and so on like that. So you have a moist seed starting mix when you fill this up. You plant your seeds, and then you put a humidity dome on top. If you want to save some money, I really like to use just a saran wrap or Glad cling wrap over the top. That works absolutely perfect because these can be a little expensive. And once your seedlings have germinated, you're usually taking this off anyways. Or you can use something like bees wrap. So this is basically a fabric that has been coated in beeswax, and you can use it as a replacement for plastic wrap in your kitchen, but you could also place it on the top of your tray, and that will help keep the moisture in as well. Now, you'll just want to keep an eye on the edges because sometimes the edges can dry out a little bit more than the middle, and just keep an eye on that, and you can always remist the top if you feel like it's drying out a little bit too much. You're probably going to need lights. I recommend reading the book Gardening Under Lights by Leslie Halleck. It is a great resource, and it may be way over your head if you're really new to this and you're not very scientific, but she has so much information on the correct wavelengths that are optimal for growing plants. But bottom line, if you don't want to look at that, that's totally fine. I started out with just fluorescent lights with one warm bulb and one cool bulb, and that was totally fine. Now I've been having a hard time as my fluorescent light fixtures have kind of worn out on me. I've been having a hard time actually finding them. So I have switched to LEDs. I do feel like anecdotally that under the fluorescent lights, the seedlings seem to do better than the LEDs, but I'm not going to say that. I don't know what the scientific reason would be for that. Again, I would suggest reading Leslie Halleck's book, Gardening Under Lights. She would know more than that on me, but just from my own experience, I've used the LEDs, I've used fluorescents, it's been totally fine. Where the grow lights, the special grow lights that you can buy, where that might be something that you want to consider purchasing is when you're growing plants to maturity inside. Then there are specific light requirements for like flowering and stuff like that. So some wavelengths will produce more vegetative growth, some wavelengths will produce more flowering or induce bud growth. So that's what her book is great for explaining all of that. But if you're just starting your seeds and you're going to transplant them out in like 6 weeks, shop lights are the way to go. Super cheap, super easy to set up, no big deal. I like the ones that can be linked together. Those work great. A lot of times they have sales on them. Grab some of those. Another thing, and this is completely optional, you do not need heat mats, but I do have heat mats for when I'm germinating my seeds. So I have these large heat mats, and I can fit 4 trays on them at once. So I have 2 of those large ones. And so I kind of rotate my trays between those mats. So I like to use the heat mats because they do kind of give the plants a little bit of boost in germination. I don't really like to set them that high. I usually set them between 72 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit. For some seedlings like tomatoes or peppers especially, I might bump it up to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And I have a thermostat for those heat mats to control that temperature. the heat mats I purchased originally did not come with a thermostat, and you just don't know what the temperature is if you don't have a thermostat. I'm not saying that you can't just be cheap and do that, but I ended up purchasing a thermostat so that I could control the temperatures, because you don't know if for some reason it's turned up too high to like 95 degrees and it fries your seedlings. So I like to have the thermostat for my heat mats. I only keep the seedlings on the heat mats until they've basically germinated. Once they've germinated, I pull them off. Sometimes I'll leave like the peppers or tomatoes on a little bit longer because they do like that heat if my basement's really cool. But most of the time you just want to yank those seedlings off and put them on a different shelf and get some other seeds going. So you can also use things like the top of your refrigerator as a heat mat, but heat mats, you can get some that are fairly inexpensive, and I do feel like they've helped my germination rates. And then the last thing that you're going to need so that you're not constantly babysitting your seedlings is a power strip with a timer. Having the timer is awesome because the lights can go on and off. You don't have to remember like, oh crap, I forgot to turn the lights off. It's so nice to have that timer. The power strip that I have actually has a side where you plug it in, and that's the side controlled by the timer, and then the other side is an always on side. So if I have a fan that I want to constantly run through my seed starting area just to cut down on gnats and help simulate wind and all of that, I'll put that on the always on side. And the heat mat, I might put that on the always on side so it doesn't turn off at night. Whereas the other side I'll plug my lights into, and then they'll turn on and off based on the settings that I've set on the timer. That's been a game changer for me. People always say if you're starting seeds, you can't leave your home. You're going to have to hire a plant babysitter. That is not the case for me. If I've left for weekends for like Easter or something like that, and I will just leave. If I feel like I'm afraid that it's going to dry out, I'll just pop the humidity dome on top. But if I have everything set up on those timers, it's really no big deal to leave for a couple of days. So it all depends on what you're comfortable with, but you can leave your seedlings. What are my actual steps for starting seeds? First of all, I'm going to need to figure out when I want to start my seeds. What am I growing, first of all? So you should, if you're starting seeds, know when your last expected frost of the spring is, and then because of that date, you can count backwards and determine when to start different seeds. So let's say you want to grow tomatoes and you want to grow onions or something like that. So onions from seed need to be started a lot sooner, like way in advance compared to tomatoes. So for example, my expected last frost date is usually around April 20th. I may need to check that again, but that's kind of the date that I always have in my head. And then I count backwards from there and just make a little list or a spreadsheet or something like that so I can stay on top of my seed starting. So if I want to start onions, I usually have to start those in like January or February, whereas my tomatoes, I can start them 4 to 6 weeks out from my last expected frost. So I'm looking at around March for tomatoes. So knowing when your last expected frost date is very important because you don't want to start your seedlings super, super early. Then they get too big and they get root bound in these cell trays. Now, again, some of these things are just guidelines. If you want to start something earlier, that's totally fine. And if you know that it may get too big for this seed tray, you can bump it up into pots or something like that. And that's totally fine. That is totally up to you. I understand when you get really excited, you just want to grow all of the things. But knowing that date's very important. Now I'm going to just walk you through the process of exactly how I start my seeds. So first off, I have my trays, I have my seeds, I have my seed starting mix, and I have some warm water. And I will just pour my seed starting mix into a bucket, pour some warm water in there a little bit at a time, and mix it all around. I don't want to pour all the water in at once because I want to make sure that it's moist, but it's not sopping wet. So once my seed starting mix is moist, I'll then start filling my trays. So what I do is I just start plopping the seed starting mix in and sliding my hand back and forth across the tray to press the soil down into all of the cells. Pay close attention to the outside of the cell tray. That way you're making sure you're getting enough seed starting mix in the outside, because I've found sometimes if I didn't pack it in quite right, mix would kind of compress down and I had very shallow I just didn't have enough seed starting mix in there. So next, once I have the whole tray filled, I'll take my fingers and I just press down. I firm in the seed starting mix pretty firmly. Like, you don't want any air pockets or anything like that. So I'll just go through each cell and I'll press down with my fingers, and I'll even maybe slap the tray on top of the table a couple times just to get all of that seed starting mix to settle down into the cells. Next, I will take another layer of seed starting mix and I will smooth it across the surface and press it down again, and making sure especially that I'm paying attention to the outside cells, making sure that they're filled properly. Once I'm done with that, then I will go ahead and seed the tray. So depending on the size of the seed, I may need to use a pencil as a dibble. So I just take, you could use like a toothpick or a pencil or anything small and just poke holes into the seed starting mix. If it's a larger seed, like maybe it's a sweet pea or something like that, the larger the seed, the deeper you need to bury it. Most of the time we don't bury our seeds deeper than about 1/4 of an inch, but again, it just depends on the seed. Sunflowers obviously need to be buried deeper than maybe like a snapdragon, which is basically dust-like seed where you just surface sow. So again, depending on the seed size is how deep I will plant it. Most of the seeds are just going to be on the surface, I do feel like. Even if I plant something like a tomato, I can still surface sow that and it does okay. So once I have seeded the tray, I will usually take a little bit of vermiculite and just dust the top of it. You could also take a little bit of seed starting mix and kind of just sprinkle it over the top and kind of press down if you're surface sowing, just to make sure you're getting good like seed to soil contact is what we like to call it. Don't have to do that, but I have found that the vermiculite is really nice to use because it helps prevent the algae growth and it also holds on to that moisture a little bit so that it doesn't allow the surface of the seed starting tray to dry out so drastically. It's almost like a little tiny mulch, if you will. Once I have the vermiculite covering all of the tray, then I will put on my saran wrap or my humidity dome, and then I will place it under lights and on a heat mat. Again, you don't have to have those things, but it's nice to do that. Some people don't place their seedlings under lights until they've germinated. I don't like doing that because so many times I have not paid attention to the seeds germinating and then they get really long and leggy and white and just it messes everything up. That's called etiolation, and it's just, I really don't like it when that happens, so I just go ahead and place it under lights. You want to place your lights just a couple inches above the top of the seed starting tray, so you might need to lower your lights or raise your tray up to make sure that you're getting adequate enough a light to these seedlings. Otherwise, they will become long and white looking, or they'll lean too much to one side. Just make sure you're adjusting the height of your lights accordingly. Some people like to use a south-facing window. You can certainly do that. Just make sure it is nice and sunny there. You don't have a tree blocking all of your sunlight. And make sure you're rotating your tray around to prevent all of that stretching towards the light. I like to take the humidity dome or the saran wrap off when at least 80% of my seedlings have germinated. Sometimes you may have poor germination, so you'll just have to keep an eye on that. But most of the time, you just take it off when you have 80 to maybe 100% germination. Like I said before, you just need to watch the moisture, and you will bottom water in the beginning until your seedlings seem to be bigger and stronger. Then you can start overhead watering if you'd like. Sometimes you may not need to fully water the tray because the seedlings are still really tiny and their roots are really not taking up that much moisture. So instead of bottom watering, you could even just mist them and that'll be totally fine. Lastly, then I'm going to go harden off my seedlings when they're ready to be transplanted. So let's say that my last expected frost is here. I'm ready to transplant things into the garden. But first, you need to harden them off. So basically that means you need to get them used to the outside. When they're used to just growing under artificial lighting indoors, it's going to be a shock to them to have real sunlight most of the time. So you want to kind of graduate them to that full sun or graduate them to the wind and all of that stuff. So we'll be placing them outside in maybe a shady spot or a protected spot over the course of a couple days, maybe taking them in and out as you see fit. Maybe you're still kind of getting a little bit of really chilly nights, even though it's your last expected frost. Maybe for some reason you're having a late frost. Bring those trays in, make sure you're protecting those little baby seedlings. And then when they've kind of went through that transition process after a couple days or a week, then you can transplant them outdoors. When I transplant, I like to transplant in the evenings. So just in case it's super hot and windy or something like that, the seedlings have time to kind of adjust to their environment overnight. They're not getting super dried out or super stressed. And then they can kind of go through a full day cycle the next day and not be subjected to this glaring afternoon sun or anything like that. I don't typically water in my transplants depending on the soil moisture. If it's super hot and dry, yes. But most of the time, I just plant them out in the evening and let them go. They got to start, they got to graduate, they got to get used to the outdoors. So just keep an eye on things. Definitely depends on your climate and your weather. And it's okay to baby them if you are nervous, but also know you don't have to baby them as much as you think. That is basically it. Again, the main things that I want to reiterate is that you need to know your last expected frost date. That is going to guide you on when to start your seeds and when you can plant them outside, and honestly what you can plant, all of these things. So keep that in mind, and you can look that up on at the Farmer's Almanac online. Super easy. Just plug in your zip code. It'll let you know when your last expected frost date is for your area. Do understand that those are estimates. Sometimes you have some late frosts. Sometimes you can get away with pushing that date a little bit too. And also the main thing is, do not be afraid to start seeds. It is so much fun. You're going to learn so much. Even if you mess up, you're going to learn so much. So do not be afraid to start seeds indoors. It is so much fun. We do have a blog post on our website at seversblumenfarm.com that kind of goes through all of these steps and has pictures and whatnot. And there are affiliate links to some of these products, but you can easily find these things at your local hardware store or at some of the places I mentioned online. So don't feel like these things are inaccessible. You can find them pretty much anywhere if you do a little bit of digging. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you for listening to this video. I hope you learned something about seed starting. I hope you're excited and ready to get growing this year. If you are new to growing, and if you are specifically wanting to have some beautiful cut flowers in your garden this year, and maybe you want to start those from seed, you're just not sure what flowers to grow or where to start, I'm actually getting ready to launch a backyard bouquet e-course. It's just a little mini e-course. You get 6 to 7 days of emails in your inbox, and every day I kind of break down the steps you need to take to grow your very own backyard bouquet. I give you little pieces of homework at the end of each day. That way you're not super overwhelmed with all the tasks that you might need to do. And I just kind of walk you through the whole process. This is definitely for someone that's a beginner. So if you're a little more advanced, you may not be super interested in this course. But if you're a beginner, if you're really interested in flowers, if you want to know what flowers to grow to make a very easy, simple bouquet that you can gift to friends or you can put on your dining room table, this course may be great for you. So I'm going to put a link to the landing page in the description of this video, and you'll be able to go there and be notified when the course is live, or maybe you're watching this video at a later date and it is live. The link will all be there in this description. So I really hope that you'll join me there. It's basically going to be kind of like a virtual workshop, and I've tried to price it accordingly so it's not super expensive, because really I just want everybody to start growing something, anything in their backyard, and growing a bouquet of flowers that you can put on your table or gift to a friend, or just do baby shower events with flowers that you grew in your very own backyard. It's a great feeling. So thank you again for watching this video. If you liked it, please subscribe, and we'll see you next time.